most of you probably avoided this popular Sarah J. Maas book series just because it's either written by Sarah J. Maas or just because it was popular on BookTok. But spoiler alert, it was popular way before BookTok. BookTok just brought it back. Today I'm going to give you a spoiler-free review of The Throne of Glass, the first book into the series. Let's get into it. First of all, we get to see Celaena's 2 years later from the events in the Assassin's Blade, which the Assassin's Blade now it's kind of controversial because people on BookTok are telling new people into fantasy to read the book that is labeled as the prequel. Yes, the Assassin's Blade is a prequel. They are telling people to read it third. Now, if you don't want to be spoiled, if you don't want to learn more about your main character without learning that everything's so complicated, I would suggest for you to read the Assassin's Blade first, because you will avoid basically the Throne of Glass first books later on, after I don't know 80% or something into the Throne of Glass, and after 65% into Crown of Midnight, the second book in the Throne of Glass series. You will avoid pretty major spoilers that some of them would be referencing the Assassin's Blade, that you wouldn't understand the ending of the Assassin's Blade because she's basically asked about the end of the Assassin's Blade later on in the next book, the first book into the series. And also you would get spoiled about what is happening with your main character, basically, with like leaving this as spoiler free as I can. But I strongly suggest you that you would read the Assassin's Blade first, even though people are like, no, they are not even spoilers. Believe me, I went into this knowing what to expect and knowing the breadcrumbs that Sarah J. Maas left us, and knowing also the breadcrumbs that are also related to ACOTAR. And I strongly recommend reading ACOTAR before Throne of Glass series if you haven't read any of them, because otherwise the expectations for the ACOTAR would be higher than just starting with a lower expectation and then moving up the scale as you're reading the Throne of Glass. Because Throne of Glass is an epic fantasy, ACOTAR is a romantasy. They are two different genres. They are like sisters, but not really twins. They are more of cousins, let's say, like sisters to cousins, because in the epic fantasy you're having a more of a world building, character development, overall development of the plot. But also in the romantasy, it's mainly about, hey, who is she marrying? What is her love interest? Of course, here it's also a love interest, because otherwise, hey, believe me, also in Game of Thrones, which is fantasy, and also in Lord of the Rings, which is fantasy, there is always a love interest and a king and a queen at the end of the books, because they're having a happy ending. And that's all fantasy was about, a king and a queen in the end, as a fairy tale, as a happy ending. But everything is much more complicated from a plot point, because of the character developments, because of how certain aspects of another character impacts your main character life, or even decisions, I would say. So keep that in mind. Just do ACOTAR first. And without digressing anymore, and hopefully that I convinced you to read the Assassin's Blade first instead of third without being spoiled, or when you will reread it, you will reread it first. But I strongly recommend to do it this way, as I was someone who knew what I was going into and I could easily see the spoilers because I already know what were the spoilers about. But without digressing anymore, let's just get back into our Throne of Glass series, which is 2 years after the events in the Assassin's Blade book, making Celaena 18 years old, where she's a slave and waiting for that sweet escape, or sweet prince, I would say, that she would cling onto and then get into a crazy championship just to be the king's champion. When she met the first time the crown prince, Dorian Havillard, oh my god, just let me tell you, Dorian, at first I wanted to strangle him because he was so smug. He was for no reason underestimating her, just because she seemed this kind of lunatic to him, or she either seemed poor or a lunatic, so I don't really know which was which, probably both of them. But he has such a poor opinion of her that was almost disgusting. Like, it was nasty. But this boy doesn't know his true power as a prince along his trusty captain of guard, Cowell Westfall. Now, let me tell you, if you think that Dorian Dorian was judgy, Cowell would have been judgmental. So it's like Dorian is like teeny tiny bit judgy, but more like tentative of smugness, and him thinking that, hey, if he's the crown prince and he rescues this girl and she's a slave, maybe she would fall in love with him because she's very pretty and because this is the lifestyle that she's been grown up into, and brought up into society. Cowell, it's more of like, oh, I'm judgmental. Oh no, she's in this mind. If she's here, she's done these horrible things and like immoral stuff, and she doesn't have a character, and I don't know, there's more to it. Like, I warn you, everyone basically hated Cowell up until the last book of the series. So if for you it's totally fine, I'm just really hopping onto your train because I really had a poor opinion about him, and then in Heir of Fire, the third book of the series, worsened my opinion about him. Yeah, and I don't think it's going to be any way nicer like sooner, so that's it. This book has the perfect amount of lore and explanations needed for you to understand every detail that is pretty much spot on with the King's Championship that we are about to witness at the end of this book and in the following book, The Crown of Midnight. The King's Champion competition is basically a set of trials that, I don't know, will remind you of probably Fort Wing, will remind you of the Solaria when the girls needed to solidify their place at the academy, but it's not really an academy setting. It's more like of a, hey, you're just going to do this or you're going to die because we don't expect you to leave here alive. But the main thing that solidified the story was all the lore that was happening in the King's Championship competition, but also after, because you're going to have some mind-blown details that will blow your socks away, and you're going to be, what do you mean it just happened? Because this was my accurate one-on-one reaction that I could have ever in a fantasy book, with being kind of confused and intrigued at the same time, which is kind of weird. But this book is funny, surprising, and also heartwarming at times, which is a nice touch to an epic fantasy where everyone just dies, there is war, everything goes to shit. There is good that there is also some heartwarming conversations. I don't know, something that will pull up your heartstrings just because there is something there like very comforting in the discussion of things that are happening and the friendships that are evolving. But overall, I think this book is good as a first book, especially if you're reading the Assassin's Blade as a prequel, because you're having already a glimpse into Selena's backstory, into why Selena is having temperamental issues, let's say, not really anger issues, but like she can flip a switch, and go on a rampage. And it's not something that you want to see often, but hey, you're welcoming it because it's a fantasy book and it doesn't hurt you, so that's good. I just hope that this really short spoiler-free review just helped you maybe dig in for the first time into the Throne of Glass book series, and yes, with the prequel in the right place. Or maybe, I don't know, it just convinced you to do a reread, because up until the next video every Thursday and bi-weekly on Sundays, I will be continuing this, and let's see you in the next video that I'm making. Until then, happy reading! Bye-bye!